Now let's begin. The autumn wind swept through Seattle streets as Russell Meyer stood outside Whitman Elementary, his phone pressed against his ear. His daughter's teacher, Brenda Morse, had called him out of a client session with an urgency that made his stomach drop. "Mr. Meyer, I need you to come to the school immediately," Brenda had said, her voice trembling. "It's about Caroline's lunch. Please, just come now." Russell's hands gripped the steering wheel as he navigated through midday traffic, his mind racing through possibilities. Caroline was 7, bright-eyed and curious, still learning to navigate the world without her mother. Heather had died 2 years ago in a car accident, leaving Russell to raise their daughter alone, or so he'd thought. Ethel Estrada, Heather's mother, had inserted herself into their lives with the persistence of invasive ivy, claiming she wanted to help. Against his better judgment, Russell had allowed it. The older woman had moved into their guest house 6 months ago, taking over many household duties, including packing Caroline's lunch each morning. Russell pulled into the school parking lot and jogged toward the main entrance. He was a crisis intervention counselor, trained to remain calm under pressure, to read people and situations with clinical precision. But this was his daughter. His training felt useless against the parental dread crawling up his spine. Brenda met him in the hallway outside her classroom, her normally warm face pale and drawn. She was in her mid-40s, a veteran teacher who'd seen everything, or so Russell had assumed. "Mr. Meyer," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "I need to show you something, but first, is your mother-in-law the one who's been packing Caroline's lunches?" "Yes," Russell answered, his pulse quickening. "Every morning for the past few months." "What?" Brenda led him into her classroom, where Caroline's pink lunchbox sat on her desk like evidence at a crime scene. She opened it slowly, revealing a sandwich, apple slices, and a small thermos. "Caroline wasn't eating much at lunch," Brenda explained. "She'd take a few bites and then seem drowsy, almost disoriented. I thought maybe she wasn't sleeping well. But today I noticed something." She unscrewed the thermos and held it up to the light. A fine, white residue clung to the bottom. "I'm no expert, but this doesn't look like regular milk residue." And Caroline mentioned that her grandmother always tells her to drink all of her special milk because it will make her strong like her mommy was. Russell took the thermos, his counselor's mind already analyzing patterns he'd been too close to see. Caroline's increased lethargy over the past months. Her complaints of stomach aches. The way she seemed foggy and distant some afternoons when he picked her up. He'd attributed it to grief, to adjustment. But what if it was something else? "Where is Caroline now?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "In the nurse's office. She's safe, just resting." "Mr. Meyer, I think you should take this to someone who can analyze it. I could be wrong, but—" "You're not wrong," Russell interrupted, his jaw tight. "Thank you for calling me. I'll handle this." 30 minutes later, Russell walked into the Seattle Police Department's North Precinct, carrying the lunchbox in a plastic bag. The desk sergeant directed him to Detective Gary Tyler, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with tired eyes that had seen too much human cruelty. Russell explained the situation with clinical detachment, falling back on his professional training to keep his emotions in check. Gary listened, his expression growing darker as Russell spoke. When Russell finished, Gary examined the thermos carefully. "Mr. Meyer, I'm going to be straight with you," Gary said, setting the thermos down. "Where is your daughter right now? Because if what I suspect is in here is accurate, this is attempted murder or severe child endangerment. That residue looks consistent with crushed sedatives, possibly benzodiazepines. If your daughter has been ingesting this regularly, we need to get her to a hospital immediately for toxicology screening." Russell's whole body went numb. The clinical detachment shattered. This was real. Ethel had been poisoning his daughter. "She's at school," Russell managed. "The nurse's office. Get her to Seattle Children's Hospital now," Gary ordered, already reaching for his phone. "I'm sending officers to your home to secure any evidence and locate Mrs. Estrada. Don't call her. Don't warn her. Just get your daughter medical attention." Russell's hands shook as he drove back to the school, but his mind was already working through the implications. Ethel had been living with them, had access to everything, and had been systematically poisoning Caroline. The question was why, and more importantly, for how long? At the hospital, Russell held Caroline's hand as nurses drew blood and started in 4. His daughter looked up at him with confused eyes. "Daddy, why are we here?" I just feel sleepy like always. Like always. Russell kept his voice gentle. How long have you been feeling sleepy at school, sweetheart? Caroline's brow furrowed as she thought. Since Grandma started making my special lunches. She said it's because I'm growing and my body needs rest. She said Mommy used to drink the special milk too. The mention of Heather sent ice through Russell's veins. He kissed Caroline's forehead and stepped into the hallway where he could breathe, where he could think. A memory surfaced. Heather in the months before her death, complaining of fatigue, of feeling foggy. They'd attributed it to stress, to her demanding job as a civil engineer. But what if Ethel had been poisoning her own daughter too? The car accident that killed Heather suddenly took on a sinister new dimension. Heather had fallen asleep at the wheel on a sunny afternoon, crashed into a concrete barrier on I-5. The toxicology report had been clean, but what if they hadn't tested for the right substances? Russell's phone buzzed. It was Gary Tyler. Mr. Meyer, we've secured your property. Mrs. Estrada wasn't there, but we found a cache of prescription medications in her quarters, diazepam, lorazepam, zolpidem. Enough to stock a pharmacy, none in her name. We've issued a warrant for her arrest. There's something else you should know. We found journals. Detailed entries about your late wife and your daughter. Mr. Meyer, I think you should come down to the station when you can. This is bigger than we initially thought. Russell closed his eyes, steadying himself against the wall. He'd spent his career helping people through crises, teaching them how to navigate trauma and rebuild their lives. Now he was living it. But unlike his clients, Russell wasn't interested in healing. Not yet. First, he wanted answers. And then, he wanted justice, the kind that Ethel Estrada would never forget. As he walked back into Caroline's room, watching his daughter's small chest rise and fall with each breath, Russell made a decision. Ethel had tried to destroy everything he loved. She'd killed her own daughter and tried to kill his. When they found her, the legal system would do its part. But Russell would ensure that her punishment went far deeper than prison walls. He understood human psychology better than most, knew exactly how to break someone's mind and spirit. Ethel Estrada wanted to play God with his family's lives. Russell would show her what it felt like when God stopped listening. The hospital room had become Russell's world for the next 48 hours. Caroline's toxicology report confirmed Gary's suspicions. High levels of benzodiazepines in her system accumulated over months of daily exposure. The doctors assured Russell that with treatment and time, Caroline would make a full physical recovery. The psychological damage, however, would take longer to assess. Russell sat beside his daughter's bed, watching her sleep naturally for the first time in months. The nurses had commented on how much more alert she seemed once the drugs left her system, how her personality was emerging like sun breaking through clouds. It broke his heart and fueled his rage in equal measure. His phone buzzed constantly, messages from Gary with updates, calls from colleagues offering support, emails from concerned parents at Caroline's school. But one number kept appearing, one he'd been expecting, Ethel's sister, Florence Weber. Russell had met Florence only twice, both times at family gatherings where the older woman had seemed uncomfortable around Ethel. Now she was calling, and Russell suspected he knew why. He stepped into the hallway and answered. Russell, Florence's voice cracked. I just saw the news. The police came to my house. They're saying Ethel poisoned Caroline. They're saying she might have killed Heather. Please tell me it's not true. Russell leaned against the wall, calculating his response. Florence could be an ally or an obstacle, depending on how he played this. The evidence speaks for itself, Florence. They found the drugs. Caroline's blood work confirms it. Whether you believe it or not doesn't change what happened. A long silence stretched between them before Florence spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I think I know where she is. Russell straightened. Where? There's a cabin. Our family's place up near Mount Baker. Ethel always went there when she needed to think, to get away. Russell, you have to understand. She hasn't been the same since Heather died. She blamed you. She'd talk about how Heather would still be alive if she'd never married you, if she'd never had Caroline. I thought it was just grief talking. I never imagined. The address, Florence. Give me the address. Shouldn't you tell the police? Russell's silence was answer enough. Florence recited the address, and he could hear the guilt and fear in her voice. Russell, please be careful. Whatever she's done, she's still my sister. She's not well. She killed my wife and tried to kill my daughter, Russell said flatly. Her mental state stopped being my concern the moment she put poison in my child's food. He hung up and immediately called Gary. The detective listened to the information, then paused. We'll get a team up there within the hour. Russell, do not go there yourself. Let us handle this. Of course, Russell lied smoothly. I'll stay here with Caroline. But even as he said it, Russell was already planning. He'd grown up in the Pacific Northwest, knew those mountain roads better than most. More importantly, he knew that Ethel wouldn't run forever. She'd stayed close for a reason, and Russell suspected he knew what it was. Florence had revealed the truth in her slip. Ethel blamed him for Heather's death. This wasn't just about murder. It was about revenge. And if Russell had learned anything from his years as a crisis counselor, it was that people seeking revenge always made the same mistake. They couldn't let go until they saw their target suffer. Ethel would be waiting for him to come. She wanted confrontation, wanted to justify her actions, wanted to make him understand her pain. Russell would give her that confrontation, but on his terms. He returned to Caroline's room where a nurse was checking vitals. His daughter stirred, opened her eyes. Daddy, right here, sweetheart. I had a dream about Mommy. She was telling me to be strong, that everything would be okay. Russell squeezed her hand, fighting back the emotion threatening to crack his composure. Your mom was the strongest person I ever knew. You're just like her. Will Grandma come back? The innocence of the question gutted him. Caroline didn't understand yet that her grandmother had been slowly killing her. She only knew that her grandmother had suddenly disappeared. No, baby. Grandma won't be coming back. Caroline nodded, accepting this with a child's resilient acceptance. Okay, I think I like it better when you make my lunches anyway. You always add the funny notes. Russell smiled despite everything, remembering the simple joy of drawing stick figures and writing dad jokes on napkins. He'd stopped when Ethel took over, letting her have that responsibility because he'd been drowning in his own grief and work obligations. It was a mistake that had nearly cost him everything. A social worker named Brenda, not the teacher, but a hospital employee, appeared in the doorway. She was young, probably fresh out of grad school, and carried herself with the earnest determination of someone who still believed the system worked. Mr. Meyer? Can we talk outside? In the hallway, she explained that Child Protective Services had been notified, standard procedure in cases involving child endangerment. They'd need to conduct a home assessment, interview Russell and Caroline, ensure the living environment was safe. Mrs. Estrada had been living on your property for 6 months, the social worker said, consulting her tablet. Were there any signs that something was wrong? Any indication that Caroline was being harmed? Russell's jaw tightened. This was exactly what Ethel would have wanted, authorities questioning him, suspecting him of negligence or complicity. The older woman had been careful, insidiously clever in her approach. I'm a crisis intervention counselor, Russell said evenly. I spend my days reading people, identifying red flags, helping families recognize dysfunctional patterns. And I missed it in my own home because I was grieving, because I was grateful for the help, and because I trusted my late wife's mother with my daughter's safety. That's what makes this so devastating. Ethel exploited my grief and my trust systematically. The social worker's expression softened slightly. I'm not accusing you of anything, Mr. Meyer. I'm just doing my job. The preliminary assessment shows that you've been an involved, loving parent. Caroline's school records, medical records, everything indicates you've taken excellent care of her. This appears to be an isolated case of a family member with access taking advantage. Isolated. Russell couldn't keep the bitter edge from his voice. My wife died in a car accident 2 years ago after months of unexplained fatigue. The same symptoms Caroline's been exhibiting. I want Heather's autopsy and toxicology reports reviewed. I want to know if Ethel was poisoning her daughter before she moved on to her granddaughter. The social worker made notes, nodded. The police are already looking into that. Detective Tyler mentioned it might become a double homicide investigation. After she left, Russell stood alone in the fluorescent hallway, his mind churning through timelines and evidence. Heather had started feeling sick about 4 months before her death. They'd lived with Ethel briefly during that time, while they were renovating their house. Ethel had cooked for them, made Heather special herbal teas to boost her energy. The same teas she'd later mentioned giving to Caroline. Russell pulled out his phone and called Adam Koch, a colleague who specialized in family trauma and had extensive connections in the psychiatric community. Adam, I need information on a psychological profile. specifically maternal filicide and extended harm to family members motivated by grief and blame. Adam was quiet for a moment. This about your situation? I heard what happened, Russell. I'm so sorry. I don't need sympathy. I need information. What makes someone poison their own child and grandchild? Jesus, Russell. That's complex. Could be anything from psychotic break to calculated revenge. Has she shown signs of delusional thinking? Paranoia? Does she have a history of mental illness? Russell thought back to family gatherings, to the subtle comments Ethel would make about how Heather had changed after meeting him, how she'd given up her potential to be a wife and mother. The way Ethel's eyes would go cold when she looked at him, then warm when she turned to Caroline. She blamed me for Heather's death from the beginning, Russell said slowly. But she hid it well. Florence, Ethel's sister, said she'd been talking about how Heather would still be alive if she'd never married me. Classic displaced grief turning into obsessive blame. But to act on it for years? That takes pathological commitment. Russell, this woman is dangerous. Let the police handle it. Everyone kept telling him to let the police handle it. But Russell knew something they didn't. He understood exactly how Ethel's mind worked because he'd spent his career studying people who'd broken under trauma. The difference was that his clients wanted to heal. Ethel wanted to inflict her pain on others, and she'd done it with surgical precision. When Gary called an hour later to say they'd found the cabin empty, but with signs of recent occupation, Russell wasn't surprised. She knew we'd figure out where she was, Russell said. Florence called her. You think Florence warned her? I think Ethel has contingencies. She's had months to plan this. The cabin was never her endgame. It was a red herring. Then where is she? Russell closed his eyes, thinking like his enemy. Ethel wouldn't run far. She'd want to see the results of her work, want to know that Russell was suffering. She'd be somewhere she could watch, could monitor. Somewhere meaningful. The cemetery, Russell said suddenly. Where Heather's buried. That's where she'll go eventually. It's where this started for her. Gary was quiet. Then, I'll post officers there. Russell, if you're thinking of doing something stupid, I'm thinking of protecting my daughter. That's all that matters now. But as he hung up, Russell knew he was lying. Protection wasn't enough anymore. Ethel had taken 2 years of his life, 2 years of Caroline's childhood, and possibly Heather's future. She'd done it methodically, without remorse, and she'd almost succeeded. The courts would punish her, eventually. But Russell wanted more than legal justice. He wanted Ethel to understand what she'd done, to feel the full weight of her actions, to break under the same kind of slow, methodical pressure she'd applied to his family. And unlike Ethel, Russell had the training and knowledge to make someone's psychological destruction look like natural consequence. By the time he was done, Ethel Estrada would beg for the mercy of prison walls. 3 days after Caroline's hospitalization, Russell brought her home to a house that felt both familiar and alien. Gary's team had swept through every room, cataloging evidence, removing Ethel's belongings from the guest house. The space felt violated, as if Ethel's presence had left a toxic residue that no amount of cleaning could remove. Caroline clung to his hand as they walked through the front door. She'd been discharged that morning with strict instructions for follow-up care, therapy sessions, and monitoring for any long-term effects of the poisoning. She was physically recovered but emotionally fragile, asking questions Russell didn't know how to answer without shattering what remained of her childhood innocence. Daddy, why did Grandma want to hurt me? Russell knelt down to her level in the foyer, the afternoon lights streaming through the windows and illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like suspended time. He'd rehearsed this conversation with the hospital psychologist, but no amount of preparation made it easier. Sometimes people's minds get sick, just like bodies get sick, he said carefully. Grandma wasn't thinking clearly. She was very sad about Mommy, and that sadness made her do things that hurt the people she was supposed to love. Did she hurt Mommy too? The question hit Russell like a physical blow. Caroline was 7, but she was perceptive, had inherited Heather's sharp intelligence. She'd pieced together fragments of overheard conversations, worried looks from adults, the way Russell's jaw tightened when Ethel's name was mentioned. We don't know for sure, Russell said, keeping his voice steady. But the police are investigating. Caroline nodded solemnly, processing this with a gravity that no child should possess. I think Mommy knows. I think that's why she came to me in my dream and told me to be strong. Russell pulled his daughter into a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling the fragile reality of her small body in his arms. She'd almost been taken from him. Another few months of Ethel's care, and Caroline might have suffered irreversible damage, or worse. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Gary. Found something. Come to the station when you can. Russell settled Caroline with a movie and called his neighbor, Marissa Fish, a retired schoolteacher who'd been bringing casseroles and offering help since the news broke. Marissa appeared within minutes, her warm presence filling the house with normalcy. Take your time, she told Russell. Caroline and I will be fine. We'll maybe do some baking if she's up for it. At the police station, Gary led Russell into a small conference room where evidence bags and file folders covered the table like archaeological layers of Ethel's crimes. The detective looked like he hadn't slept in days, his shirt rumpled, coffee stains on his tie. We finished processing Ethel's living quarters, Gary said without preamble. Russell, this woman kept records of everything. It's like she wanted someone to find it, wanted credit for what she was doing. He opened a journal, one of several stacked on the table. Ethel's handwriting filled the pages, neat, methodical, chilling in its clinical detachment. Russell read aloud, Day 47. Increased dosage slightly. Heather complained of headaches again. She suspects nothing. The teas mask the taste perfectly. Russell continues to work long hours, oblivious. He's destroying my daughter from the inside with his ambitions, his needs, his selfish love. I'm just accelerating what he started. The date corresponded to 3 months before Heather's death. Russell's hands shook as he turned pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. Ethel had documented her daughter's deterioration with scientific precision, noting symptoms, adjusting dosages, recording Heather's conversations with a cold fascination. She poisoned Heather deliberately, Russell said, the reality settling over him like ice water. The car accident wasn't an accident. She made Heather drowsy and disoriented. Then what? Called her? Created a situation where Heather would be driving. Gary flipped to another section. Entries dated around Heather's death. Read this. Day 118. Heather called this morning, frantic about an emergency at one of her construction sites. Structural issue that needed immediate attention. She sounded tired. Good. I suggested she grab coffee on the way, even offered to pick up Caroline early from daycare so she wouldn't have to rush back. She was so grateful, so trusting, just like when she was a little girl, believing her mother only wanted what was best for her. Russell's vision blurred. She manufactured the emergency? We're checking. If Ethel called Heather's work pretending to be someone from the construction site, if she created false urgency knowing Heather was impaired from the drugs, that's premeditated murder. Why? Russell's voice cracked. Why would she kill her own daughter? Gary opened another journal, this one older, pages yellowed with time. This goes back years. Ethel's husband, Heather's father, died when Heather was 16. Suicide. The journals from that period show that Ethel blamed herself, developed this obsession with controlling her daughter's life, keeping her safe. When Heather met you, got engaged, got pregnant, Ethel saw it as Heather abandoning her, choosing you over the life Ethel had planned. Russell flipped through entries dating from his early relationship with Heather. Ethel's words dripped with contempt for him, for his career choice, for his middle-class background. She'd wanted Heather to marry someone wealthy, someone who would elevate the family's social status. Instead, Heather had fallen in love with a counselor who worked with trauma victims and barely made enough to support a family comfortably. She's throwing away her potential for a man who makes $65,000 a year, Russell read. Her father would be ashamed. I'm ashamed, but I'll smile at the wedding, I'll pretend to be happy, and I'll wait. Heather will realize her mistake eventually. They all do. But Heather never did realize her mistake. She'd loved Russell completely, built a life with him that had nothing to do with money or status, and everything to do with partnership and joy. That love had been Ethel's failure, her humiliation, and rather than accept it, she decided to erase it. The entries about Caroline are even worse, Gary warned. After Heather died, Ethel shifted her focus to your daughter. She saw Caroline as a second chance, a way to redo everything she felt Heather had done wrong. But Russell, she also saw Caroline as an extension of you. Hurting Caroline was hurting you. Russell found the section, felt his stomach turn as he read Ethel's words. Caroline looks so much like Heather at that age. But I see Russell in her stubbornness, her questions, her messy room. I see what he's doing to her, making her ordinary, making her common. She'll grow up to be like him if I don't intervene. The special milk will help. It will make her compliant, easier to guide. Eventually, Russell will prove himself the failure I always knew he was. He'll lose his job, maybe start drinking, spiral like so many weak men do. And when that happens, I'll be there to take Caroline. I'll raise her properly, the way I should have raised Heather from the start, without a man's interference. The room spun. Russell gripped the edge of the table, his professional composure finally shattering. Ethel hadn't just wanted to kill Caroline. She'd wanted to break Russell first, to destroy him psychologically so she could justify taking his daughter, could paint herself as the savior rescuing a child from an unfit parent. She was playing a long game, Russell said quietly. The poisoning was never meant to kill Caroline quickly. It was meant to make her sick, make me seem negligent, give Ethel grounds for custody. That's our theory, Gary confirmed. But something changed. Maybe she got impatient. Maybe she realized you were stronger than she expected. The dosages in the last month increased significantly. Caroline would have died or suffered permanent damage if that teacher hadn't noticed. Russell's mind raced through implications, through the psychological profile emerging from these journals. Ethel was a narcissist with sociopathic tendencies, someone who viewed people as objects to be manipulated. She'd murdered her own daughter out of wounded pride and was attempting to murder her granddaughter as part of an elaborate revenge fantasy. Have you found her yet? Gary shook his head. She's gone to ground. We've got alerts on her credit cards, her car, her phone. We're monitoring Florence and other family members. But Ethel seems to have planned for this possibility. She withdrew $40,000 in cash 2 weeks ago, closed several accounts. She has resources and time. She'll surface, Russell said with certainty. Her psychology won't let her stay hidden. She needs validation, needs to see the results of her work. She'll make contact. With you? Eventually. But first, she'll try to justify herself to someone who'll understand. Family members who'll listen to her side of the story. As if summoned by Russell's words, his phone rang. The number was blocked, but Russell had been expecting this call since Caroline came home from the hospital. He answered on speaker, Gary leaning forward intently. Russell. Ethel's voice was calm, almost pleasant. I saw Caroline on the local news footage. She looks well. I'm glad. Russell forced himself to breathe evenly, to stay calm. This was his moment to gather information, to understand Ethel's next move. Where are you, Ethel? Somewhere safe. Somewhere I can think clearly about what happens next. You've turned everyone against me. Florence won't take my calls. The police are saying horrible things about me. You've poisoned them all against me. The irony would have been laughable if Russell wasn't gripping his phone so hard his knuckles went white. You poisoned my daughter. I was helping her. Ethel's voice sharpened, the pleasant mask slipping. She was becoming like you, weak, ordinary, settling for mediocrity. I was trying to save her from your influence. Give her the opportunities Heather threw away. You killed Heather. Silence stretched between them. When Ethel spoke again, her voice was cold. Heather killed herself the day she chose you over her family, over her future. I just hastened the inevitable. She would have been miserable with you eventually. She would have realized what she'd given up. I saved her from that disappointment. Russell closed his eyes, using every technique he'd ever taught clients about emotional regulation. He needed to keep Ethel talking, needed her to reveal something useful. Why call me now? Because I want you to understand. I'm not the villain in this story, Russell. You are. You took my daughter from me, and then you took my chance to raise my granddaughter properly. Everything I did was out of love. Love doesn't poison children. Love does what's necessary. Ethel snapped. You of all people should understand that. You're a counselor. You know that sometimes you have to hurt people to help them, have to make hard choices. I made those choices for my family. Gary was frantically typing, trying to trace the call. He shook his head. Ethel was using a burner phone, probably calling from a location that wouldn't help them. What do you want, Ethel? I want my life back. I want people to understand that I'm not a monster. I want Caroline to know that everything I did was for her benefit. And Russell, her voice softened dangerously. I want you to suffer the way I suffered when Heather died, when I lost my daughter because of you. You lost Heather because you murdered her. I lost her years before that. Ethel screamed, her composure completely shattering. I lost her when she met you, when she chose your pathetic little life over everything I'd sacrificed to give her. You're nothing, Russell. You're a nobody who makes poverty wages helping broken people. And somehow, you convinced my brilliant, beautiful daughter that you were enough. You weren't enough then, and you're not enough now. Caroline deserves better than you. Caroline deserves a father who doesn't poison her. This isn't over, Ethel hissed. I'll get my chance to tell my story, to make people understand. And when I do, everyone will see you for what you really are, a failure who couldn't protect his wife or his daughter. The call ended. Russell stood frozen, processing the conversation while Gary coordinated with tech teams analyzing the call. She's deteriorating, Russell said clinically, falling back into his professional assessment mode. The mask is cracking. She's losing control of the narrative, and that's what she can't tolerate. She'll make a mistake. You baited her expertly, Gary observed. Been practicing? I've spent 10 years talking people down from ledges, both literally and figuratively. Ethel's psychology is textbook. She's a narcissist who sees herself as the victim, who's rewritten history to justify her actions. But underneath that delusion, there's rage. Pure, focused rage directed at me. Which makes you the target? Russell, I'm assigning protection. No. Russell's voice was firm. If Ethel thinks I'm protected, she'll go further underground. But if I'm vulnerable, if she thinks she has a chance to hurt me again, she'll surface. She can't help herself. That's insane. She's already tried to kill your daughter. She won't hesitate to hurt you. I'm counting on it, Russell said quietly. Because when she comes for me, I'll be ready. And I'll make sure she never hurts anyone again. Gary started to protest, but Russell was already walking toward the door, his mind calculating angles and possibilities. Ethel had made one crucial mistake. She'd documented everything, provided Russell with a complete psychological profile of his enemy. Now he understood exactly how her mind worked, what motivated her, what would break her. The police would catch Ethel eventually. But before they did, Russell would ensure that she experienced a fraction of the suffering she'd inflicted on his family. He'd spent his career building people up, helping them heal. It was time to use those same skills in reverse, to systematically dismantle Ethel Estrada's psyche piece by piece. She wanted to see him suffer? Russell would give her that satisfaction, right before he showed her what real suffering looked like. Russell returned home to find Caroline and Marissa making cookies in the kitchen, flour dusted across the counters, and Caroline's nose. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal against the backdrop of his conversation with Ethel, but Russell forced himself to smile, to engage with the moment. Smells good in here, he said, kissing the top of Caroline's head. Chocolate chip. Caroline held up a misshapen cookie. I made this one special for you. It's perfect, Russell assured her, taking a bite even though his stomach churned with residual adrenaline from the phone call. After Marissa left with promises to return the next day, Russell tucked Caroline into bed. She'd asked if they could leave the night light on, a regression to earlier childhood that Russell understood completely. The world had proven itself dangerous, and children needed light to feel safe. Daddy, Caroline's voice was small in the darkness. Will Grandma try to hurt me again? Russell sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. I won't let her anywhere near you ever again. That's a promise. But what if she's smart? What if she tricks you like she tricked us before? The question revealed Caroline's emerging understanding of what had happened. She was processing betrayal, learning that people you trust could harbor evil intentions. It was a lesson Russell had hoped she wouldn't need to learn for years, if ever. I'm smarter now, Russell said, and I'm watching for her. So are the police. So are our neighbors. You have a whole army of people protecting you. Caroline seemed satisfied with this answer, snuggling deeper into her blankets. Daddy, can you make my lunches from now on? Even after all this is over. I'd love to. After Caroline fell asleep, Russell descended to his basement office, a space he'd converted years ago for client sessions and paperwork. He opened his laptop and began compiling everything he knew about Ethel. Every journal entry Gary had shown him, every conversation they'd had over the years, every observation from family gatherings. Russell was a crisis intervention counselor, but his training included extensive work in behavioral psychology, trauma response, and manipulation tactics. He knew how to read people, how to find pressure points, how to guide someone towards psychological breakthrough or breakdown. Ethel had operated from the shadows, using subtle manipulation over time to achieve her goals. Russell would do the same, but with surgical precision. He began creating a profile, identifying Ethel's vulnerabilities. Pride and status obsession. Ethel had built her identity around being from a good family, around maintaining appearances and social standing. Need for control. She couldn't tolerate situations where others made decisions without her input or where outcomes defied her expectations. Victim mentality. Despite being the perpetrator, Ethel genuinely believed she was the wronged party. This delusion was her psychological foundation. Fear of exposure. Underneath the narcissism, Ethel feared being seen as she truly was, a failure who'd lost her husband to suicide and her daughter to a man she considered beneath them. Isolation from family. Florence and other relatives were distancing themselves. Ethel's support network was crumbling. Russell's plan began taking shape. He wouldn't just wait for Ethel to be arrested. He'd systematically destroy the narrative she'd built around herself, expose her to the family members she still cared about impressing, ensure that even if she evaded legal consequences, her psychological punishment would be total. His phone buzzed, a text from Adam Koch. Heard about the call with Ethel. Gary told me. Russell, be careful. Revenge isn't your style, and it won't help Caroline heal. Russell typed back, this isn't revenge. It's justice. But he knew he was lying, at least partially. This was absolutely revenge. Ethel had taken Heather from him, had tried to take Caroline. She'd stolen 2 years of normalcy, 2 years of peace. Russell wanted her to understand what that felt like, wanted to watch her unravel the way Heather must have unraveled in those final months, confused and frightened as her body betrayed her. Over the next 3 days, Russell put his plan into motion. First, he reached out to Florence. I need your help, he told her over coffee at a quiet cafe. I know this is difficult because Ethel's your sister, but I need you to understand what she did, completely and fully. Florence looked older than she had at their last meeting, grief and guilt aging her features. I've been reading the news coverage. The police showed me some of her journals. Russell, I had no idea she was that sick. I knew she resented you, knew she'd never accepted your marriage to Heather. But this is beyond anything I imagined. She called me, Russell said, watching Florence's reaction. She's still convinced she's the victim, that everything she did was justified. She needs to be shown the truth, Florence. Not by the courts or the media, but by family. By people whose opinions she actually values. She won't listen to me. She thinks I betrayed her by telling you about the cabin. She will listen if we create the right circumstances, Russell pressed. Ethel's operating from a place of delusion. Part of her knows what she did was wrong, but she suppressed that knowledge behind layers of justification. If we can crack those layers, if we can force her to confront reality, she'll either break down completely or finally take responsibility. Florence studied him. You want to trap her psychologically. I want her to face consequences. Real consequences that go beyond prison time. Prison she can rationalize, can play the victim about. But having her entire family see her for what she is, having the carefully constructed image she's maintained for decades shatter completely, that's something she can't escape. That's cruel. So was poisoning my daughter. Florence flinched, but didn't argue. After a long moment, she nodded. What do you need me to do? Russell outlined his plan. Florence would reach out to other family members, Ethel's cousins, her late husband's relatives, anyone who still maintained contact. She'd share the journals, the evidence, the truth. More importantly, she'd arrange a family meeting, ostensibly to discuss supporting Ethel through this difficult time. She'll hear about it, Russell said. Her ego won't let her stay away. She'll want to defend herself, to convince the family that she's been wronged. And when she shows up, we'll have the police ready. But more importantly, we'll have the family ready to confront her with truth. You're using us as bait, Florence said quietly. I'm using her pathology against her. Ethel can't stand the thought of being judged by family. She'll come to change their minds, and that's when everything ends. Over the next week, Florence played her role perfectly. She called relatives, sent emails, organized a gathering at her home for the following Saturday. The invitations were carefully worded, supporting Ethel and understanding what happened. Meanwhile, Russell worked with Gary to ensure police presence would be ready but hidden. They'd have officers in unmarked cars, watchers positioned around Florence's neighborhood. The moment Ethel appeared, they'd move in. But they'd give Russell 10 minutes first. 10 minutes for the family confrontation that would serve as the real punishment. Russell also began his own campaign. He reached out to Ethel's former friends, women she'd socialized with at country clubs and charity events. He shared the truth about what had happened, about the journals, about Heather's murder. The news spread through Ethel's social circle like wildfire, destroying the reputation she'd spent decades building. Every few days, Ethel would call Russell from a new burner phone. Each conversation revealed more of her deteriorating mental state. "They're all turning against me," she hissed during one call. "My own family won't talk to me. Florence is lying to everyone. You've poisoned them, Russell, just like you poisoned Heather against me." "I haven't told them anything that isn't true," Russell replied calmly. "Your journals spoke for themselves. Those journals were private. They were my thoughts, my processing. Everyone has dark thoughts. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything when you act on those thoughts. When you murder your daughter and attempt to murder your granddaughter. That's not dark thoughts, Ethel. That's evil." She hung up, but Russell knew the words had landed. Each conversation was a calculated attack on her psychological defenses, a reminder that her justifications held no weight. Caroline was improving daily. With therapy and Russell's constant presence, she was beginning to laugh again, to play without the drowsiness that had plagued her for months. She was also asking harder questions, processing what had happened with a child's brutal honesty. "Did Grandma love me?" she asked one afternoon, while Russell helped her with homework. "In her own way, yes," Russell said carefully. "But love doesn't excuse hurting people. Grandma's love was sick, twisted. It wasn't real love." "What's real love?" Russell pulled Caroline close. "Real love is wanting what's best for someone, even when it's hard. Real love is protecting someone without controlling them. Real love is what your mom and I had. What you and I have. It's not perfect, but it's honest and safe." Caroline nodded, seeming to understand. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in the world." On Friday, the day before the scheduled family gathering, Gary called with news. "We've had activity on one of Ethel's old credit cards. She made a purchase at a pharmacy in Bellingham. Hair dye, makeup. She's trying to change her appearance, which means she's planning something. She's planning to come to the family meeting," Russell said. "She can't resist. The idea that her family is meeting to discuss her without her presence? It's killing her. She'll come to defend herself. Then we'll be ready. Russell, I need you to stay away from Florence's house tomorrow. Let us handle this." "I'll be there," Russell said firmly. "Caroline will be safe with Marissa, but I need to be there when Ethel shows up. I need to look her in the eyes when her world falls apart." Gary sighed heavily. "Against my better judgment, I'll allow it. But the moment things get volatile, you step back and let us take over." "Agreed." Saturday arrived with autumn rain, fitting weather for the confrontation Russell had been orchestrating. He dropped Caroline off with Marissa, who'd agreed to take her to a children's museum for the day, far from anything that might happen. "Be careful," Marissa said, squeezing Russell's hand. "Whatever you're planning, remember that Caroline needs you whole and present, not consumed by revenge." "This isn't about revenge," Russell lied again. "It's about closure." He drove to Florence's house in a suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns and tidy homes projected an image of respectable comfort. Inside, approximately 15 family members had gathered, cousins, aunts, uncles, people who'd known Ethel for decades. They sat in Florence's living room with coffee and uncomfortable silence, waiting for Russell to explain why they were really there. Russell stood before them, aware of Gary and several plainclothes officers positioned throughout the house and neighborhood. This was theater, carefully staged with a specific outcome in mind. "Thank you all for coming," Russell began. "I know this is difficult. Ethel is family to all of you, has been part of your lives for decades. What I'm about to share will challenge everything you thought you knew about her." He walked them through the evidence methodically, the journals, the poisoning, Heather's murder, the attempt on Caroline's life. He showed them copies of journal entries where Ethel had written about them too, had judged and criticized family members behind their backs while maintaining a pleasant facade. Shock rippled through the room, followed by anger, denial, grief. A cousin named Roberto Moon spoke up. "This can't be real. Ethel loved Heather. She was devoted to that girl. She was obsessed with controlling Heather," Russell corrected. "And when Heather chose her own path, Ethel couldn't handle it. Read the journals yourself. They're all available through the police investigation." Florence added her voice, tears streaming down her face. "I've known my sister my whole life. I've seen her manipulate, seen her lie, seen her play victim when she was really the aggressor. I didn't want to believe she could murder, but Russell's right. The evidence is overwhelming. An elderly aunt named Velma McGrath shook her head. What do you want from us? Why gather us here if Ethel's already on the run from police? Because she can't stay away, Russell said. Ethel's psychology won't allow her to let you all believe she's guilty. She'll come here, today, to defend herself. And when she does, I want her to see that her family knows the truth. I want her to face real consequences, not just legal ones, but the destruction of everything she valued. Her reputation, her family's respect, her carefully constructed image of herself as the victim. That's sadistic, someone muttered. So was poisoning a 7-year-old child, Russell shot back. So was murdering your own daughter. Ethel operated with calculation and cruelty for years. I'm simply using the same approach, targeted, psychological pressure designed to achieve a specific outcome. The room fell silent. Then Roberto spoke again. What makes you think she'll show up? Because I know her, Russell said simply. I've spent 10 years studying human psychology, understanding what drives people to act. Ethel can't stand the thought of losing control of her narrative. She's probably outside right now, watching the house, working up the courage to walk in and face us. He was right. 10 minutes later, a car pulled up outside, an older sedan Ethel had probably borrowed or stolen. Through the window, Russell watched as Ethel sat in the driver's seat, staring at Florence's house. Even from a distance, he could see she'd changed her appearance. Short dark hair instead of her usual gray, different clothing style. But her posture was unmistakable. Gary's voice crackled through the radio earpiece Russell was wearing. We see her. Should we move in? Give me 10 minutes, Russell murmured, pressing the radio close to his lips. Let her come inside. Ethel finally emerged from the car, walking toward the house with rigid determination. Florence answered the door, gasping slightly, but stepping back to let her sister enter. Ethel walked into the living room, her eyes sweeping across the assembled family before landing on Russell. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then Ethel's face twisted with rage. You did this, she spat. You turned them all against me. I showed them who you really are, Russell replied calmly. The journals did the rest. Ethel's eyes darted around the room, seeing the truth in her family members' faces. Horror, disgust, betrayal. The people whose respect she'd craved for decades were looking at her like a stranger, a monster. You don't understand, Ethel said, her voice rising. I was trying to save Heather. She was throwing her life away on him. She pointed at Russell. He was nobody, nothing, and she chose him over everything I'd given her. You killed her, Florence said, her voice breaking. You poisoned our Heather. She was my daughter. Ethel screamed. Mine. I gave birth to her, raised her, sacrificed everything for her, and she abandoned me for him. So yes, I took her back. I freed her from the mistake she'd made. The room erupted in shocked gasps and angry shouts. Ethel's mask had completely shattered, revealing the twisted logic beneath. She'd just confessed to murder in front of 15 witnesses. Russell felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. This was what he'd orchestrated, a complete psychological breakdown, a public confession, and the destruction of Ethel's self-image all at once. And Caroline? Russell asked quietly, cutting through the chaos. What was your excuse for poisoning a child? Ethel's face contorted. She was becoming like you. I could see it happening. I had to stop it, had to save her before it was too late. You were killing her. I was saving her from a life of mediocrity. Gary and his officers burst through the door, moving swiftly to restrain Ethel. She fought, screaming accusations and justifications as they handcuffed her. But her eyes never left Russell's. This isn't over, she shrieked as they dragged her toward the door. You'll pay for this. You took everything from me. No, Russell said, his voice carrying across the chaos. You took everything from yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it. As the police led Ethel away, still screaming, Russell stood in Florence's living room surrounded by shell-shocked family members. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Ethel's complete psychological destruction, captured on body cameras and witnessed by her entire family. She'd confessed to murder, revealed her pathology, and destroyed any remaining sympathy anyone might have felt. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Russell felt hollow rather than triumphant. Ethel was broken, yes. She'd face legal consequences and spend the rest of her life in prison. Her reputation was destroyed, her family estranged, her self-image shattered. It was everything Russell had planned. Yet standing there, he realized that revenge didn't feel the way he'd imagined. Ethel's suffering wouldn't bring Heather back. It wouldn't erase the months Caroline had spent being poisoned. It wouldn't undo the trauma or restore the years they'd lost. Florence appeared at his side, placing a hand on his arm. "Is it over now?" Russell nodded slowly. "It's over. Was it worth it? Doing it this way?" Russell thought of Caroline, waiting at the museum, unaware that her grandmother had just been arrested. He thought of Heather, whose murder had finally been avenged. He thought of the careful psychological trap he'd laid, the systematic destruction of Ethel's psyche. "Ask me in a year," he said finally. "After Caroline's had therapy, after we've started to heal. Ask me then if the revenge was worth the emotional energy." "For what it's worth," Florence said quietly, "I think you did what you had to do." Ethel wouldn't have confessed otherwise. She would have fought it in court, would have maintained her victim narrative. This way, there's no doubt. No possibility of her manipulating a jury or a judge. Russell knew she was right. Ethel's confession, given in front of witnesses and captured on police body cameras, would ensure a conviction. There would be no long trial, no opportunity for Ethel to play victim or manipulate public opinion. She'd be sentenced and forgotten, exactly as she deserved. As he left Florence's house, passing news vans that had already begun gathering after police scanners caught word of the arrest, Russell felt the weight of the past weeks settle over him. He'd won. Ethel was defeated. Justice had been served. But the victory felt bittersweet, tainted by the knowledge that he'd used his professional skills, meant for healing, to destroy someone's mind. Even if that someone was Ethel, even if she deserved it, Russell had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He drove to pick up Caroline, rehearsing how to tell her that Grandma had been arrested, that the nightmare was finally over. But as he pulled into Marissa's driveway, seeing Caroline's face light up at his arrival, Russell realized that the real work was just beginning. Revenge was complete. Now came the harder part, healing. 2 months later, Russell sat in his office conducting a client session when Caroline burst through the door after school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She was smiling, genuinely smiling, in a way she hadn't since before Ethel had entered their lives. "Daddy, guess what? I got an A on my science project." Russell excused himself from his client, a teenager dealing with family trauma, ironically, and gave Caroline his full attention. "That's amazing. Tell me about it." As Caroline enthusiastically described her project about plant growth, Russell marveled at her resilience. She'd been through hell, had been systematically poisoned by someone who should have protected her, yet here she was bouncing back with the remarkable elasticity of childhood. They had therapy twice a week, and Caroline was processing the trauma at her own pace, asking questions when she needed to and finding joy where she could. The legal proceedings against Ethel had moved swiftly. Her confession, combined with overwhelming physical evidence, had eliminated any possibility of plea bargaining. She'd been sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, one for Heather's murder, one for the attempted murder of Caroline. The judge had called it one of the most calculating and cruel cases he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. Ethel hadn't looked at Russell during sentencing. She'd sat in the defendant's chair, a shell of her former self, broken and diminished. The psychological unraveling Russell had initiated had continued in jail, accelerated by isolation and the reality of her situation. According to Gary, who'd kept Russell updated, Ethel had tried to maintain her victim narrative with other inmates and guards, but no one was buying it. Child killers weren't respected anywhere, even among criminals. Russell had attended the sentencing with Caroline safely at home with Marissa. He needed to see it through, needed the closure of watching Ethel be led away in chains. But he'd felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Only a hollow sense of completion. The investigation into Heather's death had been officially reopened and resolved. The medical examiner had found traces of benzodiazepines in preserved tissue samples that had been missed during the original autopsy. The drugs had metabolized by the time Heather's body was found, but traces remained in her liver. Combined with Ethel's journals and her confession, the cause of death was officially changed from accidental to homicide. Russell had held a small memorial service for Heather, a proper one that acknowledged the truth of her death. Florence and several family members had attended, along with Heather's college friends and former colleagues. They'd shared stories, cried together, and finally given Heather the recognition she deserved, not as a victim of a tragic accident, but as a murdered woman whose life had been stolen by someone who claimed to love her. Caroline had helped plant a tree in their backyard in Heather's memory, a Japanese maple that would bloom red each spring. It was healing in a way Russell hadn't anticipated, giving them both a tangible connection to Heather that wasn't tainted by Ethel's crimes. "Daddy," Caroline's voice pulled him back to the present. "You okay?" Russell smiled. "I'm perfect. Just thinking about how proud I am of you. Can we make tacos for dinner? With the funny faces on the plates?" "Absolutely." As they left his office together, heading home through Seattle's streets now decorated with early holiday lights, Russell reflected on the past months. He'd set out for revenge, had systematically destroyed Ethel's psyche, and ensured her suffering. He'd won completely, had achieved every goal he'd set. But the real victory wasn't Ethel's downfall. It was this: walking hand in hand with his daughter, hearing her laugh, watching her heal. It was the therapy sessions where Caroline processed her trauma and came out stronger. It was the quiet evenings making dinner together, the bedtime stories, the mundane, beautiful routine of normal life. Ethel had tried to take this from him, had nearly succeeded. But Caroline was alive, thriving, and every day she grew stronger was another day proving that Ethel had failed. That was the justice that mattered, not the sentencing, not the psychological destruction, but the simple fact that Russell and Caroline had survived and were building a life that Ethel couldn't touch. At home, while making tacos with Caroline's help, her messy, enthusiastic help, Russell's phone rang. It was Adam Koch. "How are you doing?" Adam asked without preamble. "Better than expected. Caroline's thriving. And you? Have you processed what you did? How you orchestrated Ethel's breakdown?" Russell paused, considering the question honestly. "I used my training to destroy someone. I don't regret it because Ethel deserved everything she got. But I'm also aware that I crossed ethical lines, that I became someone I didn't recognize for a while." "Are you that person now?" "No. I did what needed to be done, and now I'm focusing on being Caroline's father. The revenge is finished." "Good. Because revenge can become addictive. You got justice for Heather and Caroline, but make sure you don't carry that anger forward." After hanging up, Russell watched Caroline carefully arranging taco toppings into a smiley face. She caught him watching and grinned. "I learned this from Mom," she said. "She used to make faces with the food too." Russell's throat tightened. "Yeah, she did. She was really good at it. I miss her sometimes. But it doesn't hurt as much now." "Is that bad?" "No, sweetheart. That's healing. That's healthy. Mom would want you to be happy, to remember her with joy instead of pain." Caroline nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Do you think Mom knows we're okay?" "I think if there's anything after we die, if there's any way she can see us, then yes. She knows we're okay, and she's proud of how strong you've been." They ate dinner together, talking about Caroline's day, her friends, her upcoming school play. Normal conversation, normal life. Later, after tucking Caroline into bed with a story and a kiss goodnight, Russell sat alone in his living room, thinking about everything that had happened. He'd wanted revenge, had gotten it completely. Ethel was broken, imprisoned, suffering. Justice was served. But sitting there in the quiet of his home, Russell realized that the most profound victory wasn't Ethel's punishment. It was his own healing. For months after Heather's death, Russell had been drowning in grief, barely functioning. He'd let Ethel into their lives because he'd been too broken to see the danger. But now, after everything, he was stronger. Caroline was stronger. They'd survived the worst thing imaginable and were still standing. That was what Ethel had failed to understand. Love wasn't about control or possession or maintaining appearances. It was about resilience, about protecting each other, about choosing each other every day. Heather had understood that. Russell understood it. And Caroline was learning it. Ethel would die alone in prison, her life defined by her crimes, her family estranged, her reputation destroyed. It was fitting punishment for someone who'd valued reputation and control above everything else. But Russell and Caroline would live, really live, fully and joyfully, building a life that honored Heather's memory without being consumed by her loss. 6 months after Ethel's arrest, Russell took Caroline to the beach on a sunny weekend. They built sandcastles, collected shells, and watched the waves crash against the shore. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Caroline turned to Russell with a serious expression. Daddy, can I ask you something? Always. Do you still hate Grandma? Russell considered the question carefully. Hate required emotional energy, required giving Ethel space in his thoughts and heart. He'd spent so much time consumed by revenge that he'd nearly lost himself. But now, watching Caroline smile in the sunset, he realized something had shifted. No, he said honestly. I don't hate her. I pity her. She destroyed her own life because she couldn't accept that Heather chose love over her control. She missed out on knowing you, on being a real grandmother, because she was too consumed by her own pain and pride. That's sad more than anything. I don't hate her either, Caroline said. I'm angry at what she did, but I feel sorry for her too. She must have been very unhappy to do something so mean. Russell pulled Caroline close, marveling at her wisdom. When did you get so smart? I learned from you, Caroline said simply. And from Mom. You always taught me that hurt people, but that doesn't mean we have to keep the hurt going. We can choose to be better. As they walked back to the car, father and daughter hand in hand, Russell felt the last remnants of his anger toward Ethel dissolve. She was punished, forgotten, irrelevant. What mattered was this moment, this relationship, this life they were building together. The revenge was complete. The justice was served. The healing had begun. And in the end, Russell Meyer's greatest victory wasn't breaking Ethel Estrada. It was remaining unbroken himself and ensuring that Caroline grew up strong, loved, and whole despite everything she'd endured. That was the win that truly mattered. That was the justice worth fighting for. And it was a victory Ethel could never take away. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.